welcome to tonight's Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County's Environment and Energy Program Open Education Forum. It's very exciting to see such a large turnout for tonight's forum. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Danielle Salisbury, and I'm a resource educator here at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County's Environment and Energy Program. Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County is a subordinate governmental agency associated with Cornell University and its land grant mission since 1869. We take the research of Cornell University and other land grant universities, interpret that research for the public, and provide research-based resources, tools, and education for the residents and officials of Dutchess County. The mission of the CCE Environment and Energy Program is to empower individuals and municipal groups to expand their knowledge and actions to protect, restore, and enhance the environment in Dutchess County for future generations. In addition to myself, I'm joined tonight by Sean Carroll, Michelle Gluck, Colin Atkins, and our program supervisor, Carolyn Clocker. If you are interested in learning more about the Cooperative Extension or the types of programming we put on in the Environment and Energy Program, please take a look at our brochure, which you will find in your folder. Our next upcoming event for our E&E program is the Low Impact Development Training in partnership with the Dutchess County Planning Federation on the evening of Monday, October 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. At this training, Nina Bassick, program leader of the Urban Horticulture Institute at Cornell University, will provide an overview of low impact development practices as applied to street tree and parking lot areas. She will discuss the importance and benefit of incorporating these strategies into municipal planning efforts, with an emphasis on the site plan review process for planning board members. This is not a training to miss, as Nina has almost 40 years of expertise on this subject. We hope you can join us on October 29th. If you'd like more information about future events and programs, please visit our website at ccedutchess.org, or you can sign up to join one of our email lists. If you haven't already signed up for one of the lists, you can find one of our staff members after the forum, and we can make sure you get added to the appropriate list. Tonight's program is sponsored by Dutchess County and was organized in collaboration with the Planning Department. So just a few more housekeeping items before we get started. Within your folders, you'll find an evaluation form that looks like this. This is very important. Please remember to fill it out before you leave this evening. This information is extremely important to us as we use it to determine what topics to present in the future and how to make our programs better. We do have certificates of attendance available for municipal training credits. Staff will be handing these out at the end of the forum for anyone who needs one. In order for you to get a training certificate, however, we ask that you do hand in a completed evaluation form. If you have not yet signed in with Carolyn in the front and received your folder of materials, please do so now. It's really important that we have a complete list of attendees for this evening, not only for reporting purposes, but also in case a municipality or agency would like to verify that someone attended one of our forums before giving them training credit. You are also going to find in your folder tonight materials related to the topics being discussed this evening. Included is a list of websites and resources that have a lot of valuable information related to the topics being presented on today. Many of the websites on this list will be mentioned in the presentations tonight, so you don't have to scramble to write down every URL you see up there. You should be able to find all of the information presented on the resource list provided. We will also be making PDFs of the presentations, as well as videotaping tonight, and it will all be up on our website. So once that is done, we will send everyone an email with the website URL, so you'll be able to easily access all of the information shared tonight. If you are unfamiliar with this building, bathrooms can be found through these doors and just down the small hallway to the right. Emergency exits are found in all four corners of the building. Finally, if you haven't already done so, please silence all cell phones. And out of respect for the presenters, if you have to take a call or answer an email or a text, please do so out in the hallway. Any questions before we get started? Great. So tonight we have a great forum for you. I will present a little bit of a brief overview on the Greenway Guide for those who are not familiar. Then Paul Byer will speak from the Department of State, about energy efficiency and smart growth community design. Following that, there will be 10 minutes for a Q&A for Paul. Then I will again get up here and talk a little bit about funding options, including the Climate Smart Communities and the Clean Energy Communities programs. Following that will be Cale Roberts from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, to speak about what's driving changes in local greenhouse gas emissions, results from contribution analysis, and following that will be a 10-minute question and answer with Cale. So before I begin giving a very brief overview of the Greenway Guide, I would just like to point out that we actually have a few copies of the Greenway Guide, hard copies, over on this table, if you want to flip through it at any point during the night tonight. But there's also a link on your reference sheet to the complete guide online, so just be aware of that. So the Hudson River Greenway is a program authorized by New York State Legislature in 1991 that targets the entire Hudson Valley to bring communities together towards 5 goals: natural and cultural resource protection, economic development, including tourism, agriculture, and urban redevelopment, public access, regional planning, and heritage and environmental education. The program includes voluntary regional cooperation from all of the 13 counties bordering the Hudson River, including all of Dutchess County. The program relies on incentives and guidelines and not state and county requirements. The Greenway Connections is an easy-to-use binder of inspiring ideas and practical solutions that highlight the economic benefits of becoming a Greenway community, exciting projects for community and waterfront development, open space protection, trails, scenic roadways, and cultural attractions. It also includes how-to guidelines that help with design decisions. Within the binder are specific Greenway guides, which are designed to help communities reach the 5 goals that I mentioned earlier. They cover topics including protecting the countryside, strengthening centers, improving suburbs, Greenway connections, and various site-specific guides such as signs, parking lots, street trees, etc. Right now, there are 24 guides published for Dutchess County. The Greenway Guide that we're going to focus on tonight is the Centers and Green Spaces Plan. This plan is more of a regional perspective, where the objective is to prevent commercial strip development along our roadways and residential sprawl into the countryside. It promotes smart growth within municipalities by focusing on mixed use, walkable neighborhoods, priority growth areas, and other methods which lead to more energy efficient communities. Today, we will hear 2 speakers make the link between smart growth actions brought forth in the Centers and Green Spaces Plan and a more energy efficient community, and what that link looks like. Our first speaker, Paul Beyer, is the State Director of Smart Growth at the New York State Department of State. In this position, Paul promotes the principles of smart growth, sustainable development, and collaborative governance on the state, regional, and local levels in New York. Paul's experience in land use and smart growth began when he worked in the New York State Legislature, where he focused on land use and environmental and public health policy. Paul served on the planning board in the town of Amherst, New York for 5 years, where he helped develop the town's comprehensive plan. Paul has a law degree from the University of Buffalo. Please help me in welcoming Paul.
I just want to get a quick glimpse of the audience. How many people are in the planning profession here? Planners, volunteer planning board members? Oh, cool, okay. That's great. Development? Any developers, real estate folks? Okay, thanks. I asked because I got my start on the planning board in Amherst, as Danielle mentioned. I saw how the sausage was made in local planning and development decisions, and saw in my opinion, a more sustainable path forward. So I started in smart growth right out in the field as a planning board member, and about 20-something years ago, I think exactly when the term smart growth was coined, and worked my way into a job that I created, and one that is ideal and perfect for me, and that is to take those principles of smart growth, local sustainability planning, and bring them to the state level, and develop policies and programs and laws, which I'll go over, that incentivize smart growth and sustainable planning on the local level. You folks, of course, do the zoning and planning. That's how it should be. On the state level, we can incentivize certain types of growth, and I'll go through some of those policies in a few minutes, and tie them to energy use and climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. It's not intuitive. It took a long time to convince folks in the state that there was a connection between our built environment and energy use and climate change. You have to make a couple of leaps and a couple of linkages and connections to get there. But I'd like you to just think about the built environment, the landscape, as a bunch of pieces on a board. And how you arrange them, how closely you arrange them, how you connect them, how do you make them accessible or inaccessible to one another, has a tremendous impact on primarily transportation-based green energy use, mostly petroleum vehicle use, but also I'll get into some ancillary areas of building, cooling and heating efficiency, and even green infrastructure, and the impacts that those sectors have on energy use. Most of us think of energy efficiency in terms of the building envelope, green building movement, from the beginning of that LEED certification, and now there are any number of green building certifications. There are even certifications for neighborhoods. If you adhere to smart growth principles, you can get a certification. But what I'm doing is going beyond the building, and that's very, very important. It's a major sector of energy use. But I'm going to go beyond that and look at the landscape, the built environment, and its relationship to the natural environment. Before I make the connection to energy, though, I think it's probably a good idea to give you an idea of what a select few state policies that are energy efficient, even though they are not energy laws. Some of them are not even smart growth laws. They don't even have the term smart growth in them. But they promote sustainable planning and development, and thus energy savings. So bear with me. I promise I'll get back to the theme, which is energy use. But I want to give you the scenario here on the state level in terms of specific laws and policies, but also the state's energy plan, the 2015 energy plan, which is now being updated. In that plan, the governor insisted that there be an entire chapter on land use and development, smart growth chapter. I wrote that chapter in consultation with the Department of Transportation, because the two are linked, as I'll speak about in a few moments. But these concepts are embedded in not just state law and policy, but in the guiding principles behind our state energy plan. So let me go through what I do to kind of set the stage here for drilling down to energy savings and smart growth. Most of you know the standard definition of sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I would argue that smart growth is a sustainable form of development. Sprawl is not. As a caveat, I don't vilify or demonize sprawl. It served a purpose at the time, and it is still the preferred mode of development. What we're trying to do on the state level is incentivize smart growth, to build out that type of development. But on many levels, sprawl is just not sustainable if it's unchecked. And smart growth is its counterpoint. Another way of looking at sustainability is through the Native American concept of the seventh generation. You've probably seen these products in the store, seventh generation cleaning products, but it's the idea that you should think about the next seventh generation when you take any action, but certainly in the area of building and development. That's critical because buildings last 50, 75, sometimes 100 years. So you're making a long-term commitment, and you are affecting several generations down the line. But my favorite definition of sustainability is simply live off the interest and not the principle. You know, the triple bottom line of sustainability, 3 Ps, people, planet, profits. That's a guiding principle in business management and so many other areas. But when we get to land use, we're talking about its counterpart, its complement, the 3 E's: economy, equity, environment. And what I learned, going back to my days on the planning board, is those 3 can be integrated when you plan any new development or any redevelopment project. They actually can be integrated and balanced. But what has emerged over the past, I'm going to say 8 to 10 years, is this 4th E. It's energy. For many reasons, which I'll touch on, you can't ignore that 4th E. It's embedded in almost everything else we do with planning and development. What really interested me about this forum is that you're tying it to the concept of centers and green spaces. That is the core principle of smart growth or sustainable development. Think regionally, as you do on the county level, but also on the Greenway scale. But focus in on your centers. Decide 2 things, 2 very simple things when you plan. Where do you want to grow, and where do you not want to grow? It's the first exercise I recommend to any community before you get into form-based codes and performance zoning and all these funky things. Where do you want to grow, where do you not want to grow? You've done that here. And as I'll talk about in a few minutes, the Hudson Valley is really a hotbed for that type of planning. Several counties in the Hudson Valley have started their planning process or guided their planning process through this idea of centers and green spaces. Many of the terms we use: priority growth areas, priority conservation areas, downtown main streets, farmland, open space. It's all the same thing. There are places where it's appropriate to grow and regrow and redevelop, and there are places where it's not. So that's why I like this definition of smart growth. And you know, smart growth, you see it has 2 features: where, as I just articulated, and how. I'll go into some of the principles of community design that are energy efficient and more livable and sustainable. And it happens where development can be accommodated with minimal adverse impact to the environment, of course, and in places where development takes maximum advantage of public investments, i.e. infrastructure, already made. That's key. This link between infrastructure and land use is absolutely central to smart growth and sustainability, and beyond that to energy savings. So these are the basic planning principles of smart growth. You probably have seen them 100 times already. As opposed to sprawl which is more of a spread out, low density form of development. You know it, you've all seen it. Land uses are separated into separate pods: commercial, residential, entertainment, separate land uses, low density, not so walkable, right? Usually car dominated. Public spaces, strategic open space. These are the things, but the counterpoint of that is with smart growth, which kind of densifies and mixes land uses together, incorporates a diversity of housing, so you can have different types of housing, different costs of housing in one place, people-friendly, human scale, walkable, and the concept of complete streets is built into the smart growth paradigm. So let me get into a few policy areas that I think are key here. New York State passed the Smart Growth Public Infrastructure Act. It basically says that any agency that funds infrastructure investments must run those projects, those funding requests, through a list of smart growth principles. And they should meet all those principles, and if they don't, there should be some justification for that. And I kind of, in a very, not a passive way, but a decentralized way, keep track of the 10 or 12 agencies in the state that fund infrastructure. Mostly the Department of Transportation, I'll focus on that, but also water infrastructure, which is key to development outcomes, and utility infrastructure. All affect land use and development patterns. So any request for funding from the state in that regard is reviewed by each agency. Each agency has a committee, a smart growth committee. It's pretty remarkable, I think. And they run these projects through that SID. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to deny funding. This is interactive process where we try to catch red flags early on and make transportation and other infrastructure projects better. But they're all run through this set of principles. Now, why is that? Well, why is the state's primary law that addresses smart growth, that has a definition of smart growth in it? I think we're the only state that actually codifies all the principles of smart growth. Why are we focusing on infrastructure? Well, this is key to the energy efficiencies that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Infrastructure determines land use outcomes. If you build highways to rural green space, what are you going to get? You're going to get development on that rural green space. If you build complete streets, walkable streets in downtowns, what are you going to get? You're going to get more developers investing in downtowns and redeveloping existing areas and existing buildings. It's a chicken and egg sort of thing. You know, does infrastructure impact land use, or does land use impact infrastructure? And the answer is yes. I always liked the late Senator Moynihan's comment, which was highways determine land use, which is another way of saying they settle the future of areas in which they are built. And that's key. So land use starts with infrastructure. That's the worldview behind the Smart Growth Infrastructure Act. And you see this circular, repeating cycle of land use and transportation investments. You could start anywhere on this circle. You make a roadway improvement, you increase accessibility to certain land. It increases the value of the land. You get new development. It gets congested and crowded. Over here, you have to either widen those lanes or build more highways to more land. And that's a circular and a vicious and unsustainable cycle, I would say. You can reverse that if you start thinking backwards in terms of investing in your centers and existing infrastructure as opposed to road widenings and new roads. The streetcar suburbs are, I think, the best example of the link between transportation infrastructure and development patterns. It's an old picture of an original streetcar suburb. There are still some that operate without streetcars on the same basis. You can almost recognize them when you go to them. Cambridge, Massachusetts was built along a streetcar line. Many of the suburbs just outside of New Manhattan in the boroughs were built on a streetcar suburb matrix. But what you get here is, I don't know if you know the story of streetcar suburbs. Basically, developers owned the streetcars and they owned the land. They platted the land out to coincide with people's commuting and shopping patterns. The only problem with that is when the developers built out on the property that they owned, they ditched the streetcars. They got out of that business, and fortunately at that time there were other alternatives to take their place, like the bus. But they were originally planned hand in glove. The streetcar determines this land use pattern. The land use pattern feeds into the need for streetcars. This is kind of a silly example. I throw this in and it never seems to catch, but I'll try again. The elevator is a form of transportation infrastructure. Had tremendous impacts on land use patterns because we could then build up instead of out. So I always call the elevator the best smart growth infrastructure site. It's silly. So the smart growth criteria in state law, again, I got to remind you, this is state law now. This is, we have to follow this, and we don't just apply it to infrastructure, by the way. I've broadened this into other areas because that's my job. But here we go, back to these location criteria that are so key to centers and green spaces and energy efficiency. Where is simply a question of location. Where to grow centers, downtowns, main streets. Where not to grow greenfields and farmlands. How is just how you design the community around that. And here's what's in the law. These are the examples of what we would call centers in the Greenway Plan. Environmental justice areas, transit-oriented development. You're in the hub of TOD in this region and on Long Island. central business districts, brownfield opportunity areas, local waterfront areas, and areas adjacent to municipal centers. We also have in the law, whether or not your infrastructure serves existing communities, developed areas, what we call infill development. And there are several counties in this region that have actually picked up on that idea, that your infrastructure will determine your land use outcomes. So they've built this idea of centers and green spaces with different lexicon and vernacular into their county-wide plans. Dutchess County and the Greenway have the Centers and Green Space Plan. Genesee County has the first smart growth ordinance, local ordinance in the state that's tied to their water infrastructure. Orange County has designated priority growth areas where they emphasize infrastructure investments. And Tompkins County, Ithaca, has combined priority growth areas, conservation areas with an inventory of their infrastructure. They actually connected infrastructure and their comp planning infrastructure needs to their land use scenario planning. So this is what Genesee County did. They took their county and they designated growth zones. Now Genesee County controls their water lines. Just like roads determine development outcomes, water lines, of course, determine development outcomes. You're not going to develop somewhere where you're not going to be able to hook up to the water. So you have to actually make a case to the county for a water line extension outside of any of these priority growth areas. And theirs is based on not so much the development of town centers and village centers and urban centers, but on agricultural preservation. That's where they started. How do we preserve ag land and open space? And then they work backwards into redeveloping their downtowns. So they have a map, and they stick to it. Their smart growth plan was prepared by their water resource agency, so you got, again, infrastructure and land use working hand in glove. And the purpose is to minimize the impacts of additional growth that would otherwise occur as a result of extension of water services. That's what our state law does, but here you have a case of a county building that into county law. They want to focus resources on economic development opportunities, revitalize existing centers, and protect farmland. Orange County has a smart growth design manual. Embedded in it was a designation of priority growth areas, which are again connected to their water authority. Their planner, their planning department, their county planner also oversees their water authority, and also happens to be the head of their metropolitan planning organization, their MPO, which administers transportation fund. So they're able to blend water, transportation, and infrastructure into their designation of growth areas, and they work off of three concepts: protect nature, create compact mixed-use neighborhoods, smart growth, and promote linkages among those land uses. And where do you grow in the Orange County plan? In your downtowns. Tompkins County had, as I alluded to before, they did a focused area strategy first, another way of saying priority growth areas. Then they did their conservation plan, focusing on natural resources first and then farmland. And then they did an inventory of how their infrastructure 20 years down the road can serve land use development patterns, desired land use and development patterns. That's repetitive. These are the community design principles that these counties in the state adheres to. One of the principles is smart public spaces, mixed use development. They often go hand in glove. This is a rendering of Canal side in Buffalo. Downtown Buffalo has totally revitalized their waterfront into a mixed-use, transit-oriented development that is water-based. Pardon me, I'm going to run through a series of slides that are Buffalo-specific. It's my adopted hometown, and I'm tremendously proud of what they've done, because this is a real picture of Canal side in the winter, no less. And all these buildings that are building up around are all mixed use. Some of them are residential, usually on the second and third floor, commercial or entertainment on the first floor. You have ice rinks in the winter. That's ice biking. In case you have never seen this, it is a remarkable recreational activity. They have water biking too in the summer. Here's another look at it. This is a mix of land uses in one place that is connected to entertainment and smart public places. You contrast this with sprawling conventional development patterns. I always point to a trend in the 60s and 70s to put recreation and exercise and open space nature opportunities on the fringe of your community, so you have to drive there. Here is the complete opposite of that. Why not put it where people are and where people can walk and congregate? You can do a lot of things in this one little area. There are probably 5 or 6 different land uses there. And this is Buffalo. Isn't that beautiful? This is Canal side, 4th of July. Remarkable. And if I haven't overdone it with Buffalo already. So here's another principle of smart growth that is going to bring us to energy efficiency. I promise. Mobility choices. When it comes to mobility, smart growth places an emphasis on walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly communities, as opposed to auto dependence. So New York State has a law that grew out of the Public Smart Growth Infrastructure Act called the Complete Streets Act, and it basically says that when you're designing your roadways, you should consider all of the users of a street and a streetscape, not just the areas where cars go, but the areas where people congregate and try to cross those streets. So instead of accommodating just cars, you have pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, people with mobility restrictions, and accommodating people of all ages. That's key. Age-friendly communities is a big deal in the smart growth community. So here you have one mobility option. This is not a complete street. I might bike there. I certainly would walk there. And here you have a downtown that is planned really around its infrastructure. And I can guarantee you that all these buildings around here have become much more valuable after they invested in this complete street. The bicyclers, the bus riders, the greenery. This is Oswego's urban freeway. Oswego is one of 20 designated downtown revitalization initiative areas. Governor's got a program called the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. One of the first things we did when we went into this community was we noticed that you're not going to revitalize your downtown under this streetscape scenario. So they're applying complete streets. This is going on right now. It's under construction. So that you're accommodating all users. Once again, it will make all of these buildings more developable and more attractive, and it will revitalize your downtown just by investing in complete street infrastructure. Here's another idea the consultant came up with. They might do these medians down the road if they can. This is a walkway from out of downtown to the residential area, more complete streets. This is a roundabout in Glens Falls, New York. Now it looks really complicated and crazy, but they're the safest form of intersection that you can have. This is a very dangerous, it was a 5-lane intersection. And now traffic moves, it moves slowly, it moves safely. I'm told by bicyclers that it's a pain in the butt to navigate this. I can't disagree with them, but it's really good for pedestrians. And right around here are all kinds of things to do, like breweries and sports arenas and stuff like that. And all of this promotes sustainability. We're reducing transportation energy use, reducing greenhouse gases, and investing in green infrastructure. You all know what green infrastructure is, usually using nature's own hydrologic water and cleansing capabilities to do what traditional gray infrastructure does, like water treatment plants and gutters. Very simple concept, really, in practice. This is green infrastructure because it captures rain and allows it to infiltrate into the ground instead of just running down the street. Porous pavement looks like a regular patio, but this pavement is permeable, just tremendous water movement benefits. This is the simplest project. It's right around here, the FDR site. It's green infrastructure because they did nothing, literally. They did not put in curbs. I think the only thing they did was make sure that the paving sloped and all the water gathers here or around it in green space. Infiltration basin, you see these on the side of the road, they catch water, cleanse it, allow it to seep in slowly, as opposed to running like a gushing river down your roadways and picking up all sorts of toxins and other nice things. And if you want to know more about this, believe it or not, our Department of Transportation has this program called Green Lights. What does lights stand for? Transportation and Environmental Sustainability. Something like that. Anyway, they give awards out and they give recognition like Green Building Awards to streetscape and roadway projects that are sustainable and incorporate green infrastructure. Okay, what does this have to do with energy? I promise I'll get there. But we have a historic preservation tax credit in New York that makes it very, very attractive for developers to redevelop historic buildings. They're usually in downtowns. It's another way of incentivizing smart growth. Most of our historic buildings anchor our downtowns. They anchored them in the past, and they are anchoring them in the future as they redevelop and revitalize. The value of heritage and history in upstate's revitalization cannot be understated. We have a commercial property tax credit. If you are eligible for a federal tax credit, 20% will match it 20%. So think about this: you're a developer, you can recoup 40% of your investment in a historic building. And there's a residential tax credit, less generous, of course, but it's a 20% credit. You get things like this: the Hotel Lafayette, where else, of course, thank you. The Hotel Ithaca, Syracuse, wait a minute. Hotel Utica, yes. And these are in centers, most of these big projects, and they were made possible by these tax credits. So what does all this have to do with energy? Well, a lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, is contained within the state's energy plan, which I'm updating, or we are updating now. The Smart Growth chapter, I forgot to put the link on there, but it's energyplan.ny.gov. And there's a whole analysis, so I'm going to try to truncate that lengthy analysis and make some sense out of it. The energy impacts of land use and development patterns. They fall into 4 basic categories. Transportation-based impacts of land use and development patterns goes to the number of miles we drive each day, otherwise known as VMT, vehicle miles traveled. The way we arrange the pieces on the built landscape affects how much we drive, in effect. That is the primary energy saving. But the effect of compact mixed-use development is also key. If you have multi-use or multi-unit buildings, they naturally will cool and heat one another. Tremendous energy efficiencies there, without even having to put in any types of gadgets or new windows or those sort of accoutrements. Green infrastructure has an impact, believe it or not, on energy use. And adaptive reuse of existing buildings and downtowns encourages smart growth and has all of these effects. Transportation accounts for about 1/3 of energy, greenhouse gas emissions, but that's almost entirely parallel to energy use too. So about 1/3 of energy use comes from the transportation sector. That's primarily petroleum use. Buildings account for 40%. So you've got a pretty big chunk. You can make a pretty big dent in energy use by the way you arrange our land uses. Within the transportation sector, they call this the three-legged stool. You can reduce energy use through cleaner fuels, we know that. Fuel-efficient vehicles, we know that. I don't deal with either one of those. But as I mentioned, VMT is the key. That's where we can get to reducing energy use, petroleum energy use, and greenhouse gas initiatives. And we do that through what's known as location efficiencies. three concepts there. Location efficiency is just another way of saying how do land uses spatially relate to each other? How do they relate to each other in terms of proximity? If you have a compact mixed-use downtown, obviously land uses are closer to one another. Many land uses are congregated in one area. You don't have to hop on a highway and go to the next interchange to access different land uses, recreational, civic, business, residential. You have them all within a proximate area of one another. Accessibility, how do you get to these places? Is your road designed to connect and make movement among these land uses easier and quicker and less car dependent? And that brings us to connectivity, which is key because you can have all these pieces arranged correctly, but you can also screw up and make it very difficult to move around and access all. So these three components of location efficiency are really the key to reducing BMT, vehicle miles, and auto dependence. And here's an example. Sorry this is a little fuzzy, but this is in Orlando, Florida, and this is, I think, one of the examples of how sprawl makes it very difficult to get around in any other way but by car and by increasing your BMT. This is a house on a cul-de-sac. That's point A. Technically, to get to point B, you've got to go out here, out on the highway, back onto an arterial, all the way around and back into this neighborhood, just to go, I'm going to say, what, 50 or 100 feet. And you can walk it, of course, but technically, the way this system is set up, you have to travel by car, or if you're brave enough, bicycle. And, you know, looking at this configuration, I'm going to guess there aren't sidewalks in the bike lanes. So that's a good example of how the way we've set out the landscape since probably World War II, conventional development patterns, it is very difficult to achieve location efficiencies. Land uses are very far apart from one another. They're not accessible and they're not connected. And when you do that, of course, if you create location efficiencies, you reduce VMT and you significantly reduce energy use. Location matters. For any given household, the number of autos it owns and how many miles that household drives is largely determined by where that household lives. It's carbon input, of course, is a factor. Here's a category that's very interesting of location efficiency. It's called spatial mismatches, and it usually deals with the distance between jobs we have in communities and the people that occupy those jobs. Very much a transportation equity issue, too, because poor people generally have to live further from the job centers. Either they live in a city or a center that they can afford and have to travel to retail and service jobs in the suburbs, or vice versa. Now they can, in some areas, they can afford to live in suburban areas, but the jobs are in the city. So that spatial mismatch really contributes significantly to an increase in vehicle miles. And this is a simple formula. Sprawl increases BMT, smart growth reduces it. And there's plenty of documentation to this effect. I'm not going to go through all of these. But if you compare population growth in BMT, you can see that it's an exponential increase in vehicle miles traveled, largely due to land use patterns. Up here, the population doubled between 1950 and 2011, but vehicle miles traveled during the same period increased nearly sixfold. There's something wrong there. We're taking up more space and we're driving more relative to population increase. Caveat. Some of that is due to economic changes. Favors the economy. The economy is booming. You're going to increase, obviously, the miles that are being driven on the road are going to increase for a variety of reasons. Between 83 and 95, the average commute increased 37%, from 8.6 miles to 12.6 miles, a result of sprawl and development patterns. But what we've seen since 2004, and largely I think due to this generation we call the millennials, BMT began to decline, and so did the percentage of licenses that young people young people are waiting longer to get their license. If they get it at all, they're preferring walkable, transit-friendly communities. So VMT went down for a while, went up again when gas prices went down a couple of years ago. But this dramatic trend up here was primarily from the 1950 to the early 2000s period. And researchers estimate that probably 50 to 60% of the increases in VMT are attributed to sprawling land use patterns. Several reports have estimated that smart growth can decrease vehicle miles traveled by between 5 and 40%. On the granular level, that's what you do on the local municipal zoning level. Smart growth changes can impact VMP by 10 to 20%, but if you plan regionally and you start connecting up, spatially connecting up land uses across municipal lines, those vehicle mile traveled numbers can be reduced even more. And there's a report that I would suggest to all of you called Boiling It Down to BTUs, and it goes through each type of household, the household that lives in the suburbs, the household that lives in the city, a household that lives near transit, or that has walkable communities, and each of those housing types have different levels of auto dependence. The most, I think one of them, I'll get to in a moment here. Lots of words. The most energy efficient form of that type of development is the transit-oriented development. It's a key piece in the state energy plan. You know, it's simply building around your rail stations. Rail stations used to be the least desirable place to develop. Now they are the most. So transit-oriented development is really the smart growth pattern, complete streets built around rail, but also upstate we're seeing a lot of TOD built around bus rapid transit systems. On Long Island, there's thousands of acres of vacant land around rail stations that is quickly being gobbled up and developed. And you can imagine, let me just go on a second here. Wyandanch is an example of a rail station on Long Island that's building around the new rail station. And all of these land uses that weren't here are location efficient. You have a concentration of retail and entertainment. You have high density housing that trails off into lower density housing. That's a TOD, it's location efficient. You see here that you can even get from the downtown to a park, very important, especially for the people that live here. Oops. That park is right here. One of the biggest parks on Long Island is Belmont State Park. They created a trail here, bike and walking trail, so that people don't have to go out on the straight path road again, another dangerous route to get to the park. They can get from here to the downtown to outdoor and nature. Again, very energy efficient. Poughkeepsie Rail Station is an emergent TOD. Over time, incrementally, there have been more and more investments there, and now they're planning it as a TOD. The background, look at this piece of infrastructure. The rail trail, you can get to the other side of the Hudson without a car, of course, you know that. And it also serves as public gathering spaces. And residents of TOD drive, some studies have found that they drive up to 45% less. There's a dramatic decrease in car ownership from about 2 down to about 1.2. Some cars have, some households just live off of one car in a TOD. Now shifting from land use patterns, let's look at the actual building energy efficiency. When you build close together, as I mentioned earlier, you share your heating and cooling. I look at that as another form of green infrastructure. You are naturally using thermodynamics to heat and cool one another. The energy efficiencies there are pretty significant. So the multi-use and the multi-unit buildings, especially in a TOD, because you have to have density around a TOD, also present building energy efficiencies, other than all the other accoutrements and gadgets and solar panels and things that come with green building. Adaptive reuse, I was talking about the historic preservation tax credit. It's not just energy efficient because it creates smart growth and density and mixed uses. It's also the concept you hear now among green building experts and historic preservationists is the most energy efficient building is the one you don't have to build. You save so much greenhouse gases and energy use by simply rehabbing, gutting the inside of the building as opposed to building new. And we have the historic preservation tax credit in the state. Counties and IDAs throughout the state now are incentivizing adaptive reuse, so you can get extra tax breaks for investing in existing buildings. And we have land banks in the state now whose specialty is to redevelop existing vacant and abandoned buildings. Smart growth and distributed energy. Let me take a moment here. The State Energy Plan and the Public Service Commission's comprehensive plan, what's called the REV, the Reforming the Energy places a great emphasis on distributed energy. We can't rely on the big energy plants anymore. You're going to see energy infrastructure literally in your backyard, and I don't just mean solar panels, things like that. Microgrids are a form of energy production that often rely on renewable energy that can serve a critical mass of land uses in a confined area. After Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, many communities, especially on Long Island, invested in microgrids because they could shut off from the grid during a storm. If the power source goes down, they can create their own power. But it's only enabled, distributed energy, community-based energy is only enabled by smart growth, really. You need a concentration of land uses because you need a concentration of customers to make it worthwhile to invest in a microgrid. So building these smart growth systems, TODs in particular, enables us to distribute our energy out further. One of the greatest energy inefficiencies is the loss of energy in transmission. So you can imagine delivering energy out to sprawling communities. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've heard figures in the area of 20 to 30% loss of energy just in transmission. So you see that smart growth also feeds this movement toward community-based energy. Green infrastructure, there are two examples I'm going to quickly get to here. New York City, you're in the midst of the great, one of the most magnificent green infrastructure projects in the nation. You don't call it that, you call it filtration, avoidance, determination, and it's a deal with the city, which many of you know about, to preserve land and invest in green infrastructure to keep your water supply clean, to avoid the water filtration plants. In New York City, they've avoided $1 billion and $100 million in operating costs annually just by investing in land preservation, about $2 to $3 billion in land preservation. Cost savings are tremendous. You can imagine the energy savings. They haven't been calculated yet, but water treatment plants are energy intensive. In Onondaga County, they invested in green infrastructure through the Save the Rain program. They did calculate that they are saving 200,000 kilowatt hours annually by avoiding water treatment plants. $20 million in construction costs, and in the process, they planted over 6,000 trees. The ancillary effects of green infrastructure, green roofs will cool the roof. Urban green provides relief from heat island effects. I'm going to stop there. I have a bunch of material on fiscal impacts of smart growth. It's fiscally more sustainable to invest in existing communities and existing infrastructure. And I'm going over time. I'm very, very sorry. But there are numbers that show that if you invest in mixed-use, dense downtown buildings, you will generate far more per acre in tax revenues, which then feeds into your local fiscal stability and your ability to invest in water infrastructure. And one of the examples, you did your own analysis here at the Dutchess County Playing Federation, found that the Dutcher House in Town Hall, haven't seen it yet, but it's really cool, generates, let's see, per acre market assessment, which is a reflection of tax revenues generated, $1.8 million as opposed to the chain drugstore in the village, which is location efficient, $822,000. Compare that to the big box Walmart outside, and you see that, what is this, about a six-fold, five-fold increase in revenues generated from smart growth, center being built in centers as opposed to big spaces. And how can you not want that? That's the key to economic, environmental, fiscal, and energy sustainability. That's what you get from smart growth. And the signature project that the governor initiated a few years ago is the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. Every year, 10 communities are chosen competitively, one in each of 10 regions. They get a infusion of $10 million. They get a state agency team, all with the purpose of investing in your downtowns. A lot of Rust Belt cities upstate are benefiting from this program. I end with that because it really is, even though it's billed as more of an economic development and quality of life program, it is promoting energy efficiency in the ways that I described earlier. I'm sorry for going over.
So at this point, if anybody has any questions, we have a few minutes left for questions, maybe one or two, and then if there's any remaining questions, you can catch a call after the forum.
I think, a lot of what you're talking about is really great. It sounds like the state and the governor are doing some really fine things. My interest is more about the REV, the Reforming the Energy Vision, and why the Vader policy, value distributed energy resources policy, which is kind of crushing solar net metering and solar power, was put forth, and do you see any fixes to that policy? Because I think that plays into all of this community development of resources, of energy, having access to affordable creation of our own energy.
Yeah, now I wish I could answer that question. For me to try would be folly. I don't fully understand the market. I understand what I pulled out of the red is simply the idea that we're distributing the energy system out into communities, and how that relates to land use patterns, how we can enable smart growth land use patterns. So I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I don't even want to try. I assume you're talking about value in terms of cost of energy in the end.
Yes, and making it affordable
Right.
to everybody.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see.
But fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Let me not even take a step. Because I don't understand the market. I just understand that we lose a lot of energy. The way we,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned Pauling, because I happen to be from the town of Pauling. It's a wonderful place.
I've been told to go there.
It's a wonderful place. But my question is twofold. Number one, as all towns, they have money issues. Are there monies available, such as for the expansion of infrastructure, such as transportation needs? I'm often wonder why across the state we don't have jitneys like they do down in Atlantic City,
Yeah.
moving people around. Our downtown is just overwhelmed with vehicles on the weekend.
Right.
And it would be a great idea if there were a jitney program specifically maybe for the weekends,
Yeah.
when we have that amount of influx of population. We're right in a railroad station, so people come up from the city all the time.
Yeah.
And we have a great downtown. So my question is twofold. Number one is, where do we get money?
Yeah.
Can we impose on the state as a grant? That's number one. And number two, how would you go about it? I mean, I'm on a planning board, but if I said, hey, this is a great idea, I want to start a jitney program in the town,
Right.
where do you start? How is that process started?
Yes.
That's
If I were you, I'd start in two places. NYSERDA, the Energy Research Agency in the state, has grown its transportation energy department significantly. They invest in things like green buses to get you from the train station to the downtown, rather jitneys, I'm not sure, but, I mean, they're always looking for ways to accommodate downtowns and to do it in a green and sustainable way. So check out the NYSERDA website, their transportation division, it's called. The other one would be going through your MPO system. You know, let me back up a little bit. Most transportation dollars come from the federal government, and they go to the road and bridge enhancements and maintenance and repair. That's the bottom line. There's a big chunk of money, though, that's called TEP, Transportation Enhancement Program, and that can go to some of these off the beaten path things, like trails that connect you from the train station to a park, complete streets, alternative mobility options, as you would suggest with a jitney. You've got to get into that MPO system through, and as a planning board member, you probably have better access to how that money is divided up. Your local, what's your MPO here?
Town plan,
What is it?
it's PBTC's, funding it. But
Okay,
it's
so you're not
Poughkeepsie
part of
Dutchess.
it.
It's Poughkeepsie Dutchess. It's, is really the urban area, I think, only now is, and I think we're countywide now, but the planning department has MPO staff.
Right.
So you'd want to give the planning department a call. I mean, that's where the transportation, and it's the transit section of the MPO development money. I would suggest Metro North. Might
Yeah,
be
maybe.
someone else to talk to as far as a possible partner and funder. I mean, they make a lot of money out of what goes into Pauling every weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it affects their train service, they're allowed to invest, it's called value capture. They can get value out of an investment. And your Pauling is, you got a train station down there.
Yes,
Yeah.
Metro North.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to go. And the MPO, when the annual, what's called TEP allotment comes out, it's a
What
funding
agency,
process.
what agency is that?
That's Department of Transportation,
Oh,
DOT. But you have to go through, right, you have to go through.
Yeah, if you look at the
MPO
county
first.
planning website under the transportation section, there's always a listing of all the federally funded programs in our region. But there's also always, you know, when the different applications for different types of programs are gonna come out.
But you're well positioned. Theoretically, the MPO is supposed to balance transportation and land use planning. So if you're coming at this as a planning board, maybe you can get your planning board to even rally behind you. If you can make a connection to your work as a planning board member, it's supposed to theoretically be more attractive, correct?
Well, it usually goes to the town, but the planning board only expedites town board initiatives.
You're just advisory.
Planning board doesn't have a lot of power.
Actually, we need to move on. So if you could save your questions and maybe kind of call at the end, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah, thanks.
Details presentation. I just wanted to give a very quick overview of some of the funding sources that are available. And it's going to be very brief because we need to move on. But all of these funding opportunities I'm about to talk about right now are actually in your folder on the resource sheet. It might be on the reverse side depending on if you looked at it already. The first one of which is the Clean Energy Communities, which is a program run through NYSERDA. As Paul mentioned, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority. This is where local governments in New York State can use this program to implement clean energy actions to save energy costs, create jobs, and improve the environment. In addition to providing tools and resources and technical assistance, the program recognizes and supports leadership for the completion of clean energy projects. To become a designated clean energy community, local governments must complete 4 of 10 high-impact action items as listed on the NYSERDA's website. Our local clean energy community advisor is Europa McGovern, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. But there is a clean energy community fact sheet in your folder as well, and Europa's information is on the funding resource page under clean energy communities. So if you have any questions about clean energy communities, please feel free to contact her. Another funding opportunity is Climate Smart Communities. which is a New York State program that helps local governments take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to a changing climate. Benefits include leadership recognition, free technical assistance, and access to grants. Participating communities can either be registered climate smart communities or certified climate smart communities, and the difference between that is registered climate smart communities have made a commitment to act by taking the Climate Smart Communities Pledge, while becoming a certified Climate Smart Community means that you've already taken action to reduce greenhouse gases, and you've completed a suite of activities that help mitigate and adapt to climate change. The Climate Smart Communities program works really well with the Clean Energy Communities program that I just mentioned. And there's actually a diagram in your folder that shows how they interact. It looks like this. So basically, if you do any of the 10 high impact action items under the Clean Energy Communities designation, they also count as action points towards climate smart communities. Then we also actually have over here set up with Cornell Cooperative Extension. We work with NYSERDA as well through our Clean Energy Communities program, fondly called CEAP, another acronym. It's a program to help residents and businesses reduce their energy consumption and energy costs and make informed energy decisions. If you have any questions or want to know more about this program, Colin is here to assist you. He will be hanging out at the table at the end of the forum. So please just review that funding opportunity sheet. There are several on there. Also from the Department of Transportation, opportunities are on there as well. And there's a link or a personal contact for each funding opportunity, as well as a small description. And they're really great to take advantage of if you have not done so already. So moving on to our next speaker, Cale Roberts works for ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, as the Program Officer for ICLEI USA and the UN Maine Representative. Cale provides technical assistance to dozens of U.S. cities, towns, and regions on greenhouse gas emission inventories, sustainability planning, and climate resilience efforts. He also coordinates with the United Nations Development Program's Climate Change Adaptation Team to support nations in unlocking climate finance for adaptation projects. Cale is a former editor of Mother Earth News, North America's largest sustainable living magazine, where he produced all climate and energy content. And from 2010 to 2012, he served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in rural Thailand, where he worked with the Thai Ministry of Energy to build home-scale biogas digesters that supported carbon accounting in community forests. Cale received an MS in Climate Science and Policy from the Bard Center for Environmental Policy and a BS in Environmental Science from Humboldt. Cale will talk to us today about what's driving changes in local greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Cale.
Who wants a home-scale biogas digester? Cool, yeah, thanks for having me. So I don't get to come back to Dutchess County as much as I like. I'm down in Putnam, but cool to see some of my former classmates in the room. Yeah, so my name's Cale, and I work for an organization called ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, the largest city network that's focused on climate and sustainability. Anyone in here worked with ICLEI in the past? Yeah? Great. Yeah, it's I guess old, 25 years ago, and has worked with many Dutchess County communities during that time. The county, Red Hook, Poughkeepsie, Beacon, and not so much in the past few years, but maybe we can change some of that tonight. So, so yeah, take note of that first question. I'll ask you about it. I wanted to come here and talk a little bit about connecting the link between smart growth and climate and greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of the work we do these days at ICLEI is to help communities put together greenhouse gas emissions inventories and develop climate action plans from that, forecasting changes in greenhouse gases over time, tracking those to the sources that they come from. a lot of what Paul mentioned falls into the different sectors that we think about every day and then quantify the emissions associated with them. So anyone in here worked on a greenhouse gas emissions inventory before? Okay, great. Yeah, that's good. Anyone never even heard of the concept? Totally cool too. Okay.
We're gonna have to do one soon.
Yeah, good question. Anyone getting ready to do one or needs to do one and is not getting ready? Okay. Cool. So we're going to get into some pretty nitty-gritty details, and don't be overwhelmed. We really start slow. We start small, meeting you where you're at. But we had some pretty exciting analysis that came out just last week on digging into our mountain of data that we've never done for the first time, looking at 138 cities throughout the U.S., including many in the Northeast, and trying to see if we could track some trends and pair those with the highest impact areas for reducing emissions. So first time looking at this stuff, and this is the first presentation that's come out since that data was released. So this is groundbreaking work here, people. So I kind of broke this presentation because it's a little bit long into 3 parts. We'll talk about greenhouse gas inventories generally using Red Hook as a case study. And then we'll get into the finer details of that analysis that came out. And then think about how does that apply to us in our daily lives as planners moving into action. Oh, I didn't ask you. I was going to quiz you, but here's the answer to the question. Surprise! Cities account for 70% of harmful greenhouse gas emissions while occupying just 2% of the land. And that trend is not expected to change at all. In fact, it's projected to be more intense in the coming years, with over 2/3 of the world's population to live in urban areas, not just major cities, by the year 2050. I think we're at just over 50% right now, right? So going into 2020, yep, tracking towards 50% now. So you can see major migration into cities. So all these issues of smart growth, they've been really important for the last 20 years, and they're going to be doubly important in the next 20. And energy managers and urban planners have a lot more power. To date, we haven't worked as closely with urban planners in doing emissions inventories. It's usually a sustainability coordinator, more and more a residential climate action committee made up of engaged citizens, and then the urban planning department, public works. The other departments kind of sectioned off doing their many busy things and don't really bring the greenhouse gas emissions piece into their work, which is a shame, and we'd like to see that change because of the outsized impact that planning activities have on emissions. And we'll talk about that. So about 40% of carbon emissions comes from commercial and residential buildings, the built environment in a city. 33% is transportation related. This schematic here is just showing if you could turn emissions, that greenhouse gases, into a skyscraper where they're happening in cities, and then to depict that planning and smart growth and the way that development happens really dictates what's going on with emissions. Another one here, so I was going to say transportation emissions accounts for about a third of urban total greenhouse gas emissions. So when you think about transportation and buildings together, that's getting close to 3/4 of emission sources in cities, and urban planners have direct control over those things. Right here shows impact of smart planning, smart development, and sprawl, roughly the same population between Atlanta and Barcelona, and massively different footprint. Okay, now I can actually quiz you. That's cool. So the top 3 sources of global greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm thinking full like sectors. So yeah, not manure, but all agriculture. So that's one of them. But I won't tell you the order. So what are the other 2?
Carbon?
Yeah, these are sectors that reduce carbon emissions. Transportation,
Power generation.
power generation. That's right. So power generation, number 1, burning coal, oil for electricity, heating homes is number 1. Agriculture, when you think about agriculture and land use together, so deforestation combined is number 2, and then transportation number 3. But as we see, this is globally what happens here in the United States, what happens between Atlanta and Barcelona really can change up this diagram quite a bit. So let's, we think in sectors when we're thinking about emissions accounting, probably also with planning, energy, transportation, agriculture. So let's dig into the top ones a little bit more, starting with the energy mix. So we're thinking about supply and demand of energy, the types of generation, solar on the West Coast, more and more with their hydroelectricity, around here more and more with wind, and then stationary sources of fuel, natural gas, propane, oil. So when we're putting together an emissions inventory for a community, we use an emissions factor, is what it's called. And for the electricity grid, the factor is essentially a multiplier that is, pounds of carbon dioxide for a megawatt of electricity. So that's a factor. Same thing with transportation and waste and others, but massively influenced by the mix. And you all know that. So this one here, Cambridge, Massachusetts example. So thanks, Paul, for bringing them up earlier. So in this case, 44% of energy is used in the built environment, or thereabouts, for heating and cooling, and total across the nation, buildings account for about 20%. And so in this Cambridge example, the city was trying to figure out, how should we target, retrofits and energy efficiency measures. So they mapped out the worst offenders in the city, color coded them, and so it turned out that 10% of the buildings, if you would just target those, created 40% of the savings in this East Coast city, or Northeast city. So the power of planning and really realizing what with your data, having a data-driven process. The value of doing a greenhouse gas inventory is this kind of prioritization of projects. On transportation, we're thinking about all modes of transportation in an inventory. So rail, if there's an airport in the community, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, of course, is the big one. Mode really matters. Thinking about the emissions factors for transportation, here's a comparison here of traveling the same distance in a large car can have a bigger impact than even flying. On many factors, but mode matters is the takeaway from that one. Here's a little discussion about VMT. So it's not understood commonly, but needs to be, that how much the location of development affects the amount of driving that we have to do. Paul talked about this quite a bit, and so the greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, we admit, is really a function of proximity you are to your jobs, to your homes, to your rail line, to your airport, and all the research that we do at ICLEI lines up exactly with what you said, that's, the proximity between goods and services has a huge impact on emissions, directly tied to DMT. Okay. So we think about emissions and emissions growth and change and quantifying what's happening in a community in scopes and sectors. We've talked about the sectors. The other one is scopes, and we do this for both government operations and for community-wide, what's going on. If you have worked on an emissions inventory in the past, was it for local government operations or community-wide? Government operations? Okay. That was the trend for the longest time, probably because the data is more readily available. But with some of these campaigns that have come out, such as Compact of Mayors, or you'll hear about the We Are Still In campaign, some of these leadership campaigns on climate are really pushing to do a community-wide inventory. We personally think they're both useful and are, complement each other to do them both at the same time. It's actually not that much extra work to do them both at the same time to get in. So back, maybe 15 years ago, inventories were all over the place. There was no standard way that people were doing these, and so there was a real need to come up with a protocol. And what grew out of that, with ICLEI working with partners like WRI and C40 cities and others, and actual cities, energy managers, what's called the Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories. And that uses a scopes-based framework. So scope 1 are all the activities that happen within the county or within the city boundary. Scope 3 is everything happening outside, like if a landfill is outside of the city boundary, but you're sending your garbage to it. And then scope 2 is kind of this gray area, mostly supply of electricity that's flowing between the two, in boundary and out of boundary. So to help solidify this concept a little bit, we're going to play a game. It's an easy game, you don't have to get up. So we got 3 cities up here: Guadalajara, Kaohsiung, which is in Taipei, Taiwan. It's a city in Taiwan. I'll give you a hint on this one because it's not familiar. That's a very industrial city. And then Portland, Oregon. So we have 3 emissions inventory donuts here at the bottom. You can see this dark blue is the energy. This teal is agriculture, and the red is transportation. So thinking about that and the scopes and the sectors, which one of these cities matches up with which donut?
I would say Guadalajara is in the center.
In the center here?
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of lots of transport, lots of energy, stationary energy. Okay. So like
And the
natural.
last one with the Portland.
Okay. With a little bit more on the industry right here, in the green. And now we believe.
And this is Taiwan.
But
Yeah,
you said the
Taiwan.
middle city was an industrial city, right?
Yep.
So it's probably the far west.
Probably
Right.
My
Yeah.
guess is
The one with industry is with the green. Yep. Okay. Yeah. And they could be better colors.
Yeah, Portland's in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here is the answer. So you're right. The one that had the heavier industry is Kaohsiung. Portland, with its drivers, driving, so heavier on the transport side. And then Guadalajara here, big on the agriculture, because that is a metro area. It's actually state of Guadalajara, so it's incorporating all the surrounding agriculture land. And that's an important point about the difference between a county emissions inventory and a city. So, you know, Poughkeepsie is not going to have so much going on in the agriculture, whereas Dutchess County has at that time. So you can actually tell a lot about what's going on with development, with land use, by putting together an emissions inventory. All right, so we'll use an example of Red Hook. It's actually Red Hook and Tivoli together. Back in 2012, ICLEI worked with, what is it? Is it Town and Village? Yeah, Town and Village of Red Hook to put together their first climate action plan, which was actually super innovative at the time. They have chapters on equity and multi-stakeholder engagement, these kinds of things that cities are only now putting in their climate action plans. Red Hook was doing this 2012, so 5 or 6 years ago, a little ahead of the game. Collected their, background data, number of households, typical energy use, the types of things, land area types of things that you would collect to get started on one of these. And then we worked with the city using, I think it was ClearPath tool, which is an emissions accounting software, all-in-one emissions inventories, forecasting changes over time, and then climate action planning, where you actually build in the measures like we're changing to LED streetlights, or we're implementing low-flow faucets. So any, dozens of things that you might do in a city, and you can check the impact about against the forecast and see if you're going to meet your reduction targets. So we did this with them. At the time, it was an offline Excel sheet. Today it's on cloud, and then you get this sort of outlook. So you can see the sectors at that time in 2012, before the protocols, were very much focused on the buildings and transportation, and then included waste too. These days we also account for wastewater and water delivery and what we call fugitive emissions, which are like refrigerants, some of those more industrial things too. And then got this and set their 20 by 20 goal. So that was 20% reduction by 2020. I wasn't here, I don't know how they came up with that, if it was really tied to the data or if it just sounded good. You know what, they've probably already met this goal. Ahead of
It was a
schedule.
little of both.
You say what? Oh, was it? Okay.
I mean, we figured, a vision
Yep.
2020 made sense, right?
Okay.
It was a metaphor, right?
I like it. You probably already met the goal.
No, I don't know that we met it. I can tell you there's a lot of issues that have to come up with the collection of data, which is another topic that we should probably talk about. Because it sounds good.
Yeah.
It looks great on paper, but
Yeah.
much more difficult to being able to narrow down what the sources are to collect the information.
Yeah, that's right. And to not fully rely on like statewide data or regional data and try to get really local is a super challenge. I said that you probably made your goal because we were working with Phillipstown, New York, and Larchmont, all a little south here, Sullivan County, and they met their goals and they didn't realize it. And so cities are setting more ambitious targets for the mid-century range. But this is the output that you all had. And you using it as an example because it was a really good comprehensive example at the time and still is. So you, on transportation piece, we're estimating things like vehicle miles traveled per capita, all the other stationary fuels, natural gas, propane, butane, these kinds of heating fuels per household, per capita, all that good stuff that we like to see, and then compared it to where you were against the U.S. average. It turned out that Red Hook, on average, drivers were driving more miles per year, probably because, against the whole average, there's a lot of city dwellers, people living near train stops. And that's not the case. There wasn't a good public transit system then. I won't say whether there's a good one now, but that probably was what was going on. Yeah, again here, fuel use per type, and the rest. So this is the type, a good quality example of what a community can do to put their data together and the kind of information you can get out of it. And then this is output from the planning module, an example of where we could take this inventory data into the future is forecast emissions changes over time up to 2050, put in, LED streetlights, solarized buying program, all the different things that you're no doubt thinking about, and then seeing, will you meet 2020? Or have you met it and you need it to be 30-20, even though it doesn't sound as good? And then, get yourself on track there. Okay. That's pretty good for the Red Hook example. So we have another game. This one's called Emissions Detective. Because you all are detectives now, trying to figure out the story behind why the emissions changed in a unknown community, but I know it and I'll tell you who it is in the end. So this is, right now, this is their emissions inventory. It wasn't always this way. Back in 2011, their emissions profile looked like this. And you can see the changes out to 2016. So it's not super important that you see that what the colors are and what they mean, but just the fluctuation in different sectors. And so what I would like you to do is, with the people at your table, we'll keep it short, like a minute and a half. Try to put together a story, like maybe 2 or 3 things that are causing this progression from 2011 to 2016. And I can tell you what the sectors are if you can't see them. Yeah. Residential energy, all this. Commercial energy are the blue, which includes local government operations. Transportation and grid. And the red is other. All right, go for it.
I don't know what it is.
What's the red?
Under, so it doesn't matter. It's under. Maybe it does matter.
Climate change.
1 year.
So that's weather things. Because you don't see everything below the red.
Yeah, what was the blue again?
The blue is commercial energy.
Commercial energy.
Yep. Local government is included in that.
Yeah.
We got some hints.
Yeah, there is. Weather.
2016 was warmer than usual. This is a growing and mid-sized city. It's not a famous city. And this is a relatively affluent community, not in New York State. Okay. Let's see if I'll give this away. Okay, I won't give it away yet. So what's driving the changes? Let's just hear some.
Air conditioning use.
Okay. Mhm.
What's the other?
Population. I don't know what the other is.
Construction.
Could be.
Increased commercial
increase commercial development,
Development.
okay? Any other clues?
Maybe, yeah, changes in the environmental code.
Okay, yeah.
Required,
Environmental code, building codes.
required changes.
Yeah, that's a good call from 2011 to 2016, very likely. So here's what actually was going on. Cooling degree days, so how, air conditioning, so that went up, population changed, commercial square footage, wow, you guys were much better than other crowds. Overall VMT, so vehicle miles traveled, is going up a little bit. The utility emissions factor, so the grid was dirtier in some of those years, and we'll explain why in a bit. And then you see some decreases here too. Where is this city? Could be anywhere. It's Bellevue, Washington, so a suburb of Seattle. And there's no way that you would get that necessarily from this. But you can know a lot of other things from the inventory, no matter where the city is, and you can start to make comparisons between Bellevue, Washington, and Dutchess County whenever you have their inventory side by side in terms of analysis of their emissions. So,
Do you see a big change? Have you actually seen a big change in any models with frac gas and
Fracking?
gas?
yeah, typically emissions will go down if they're switching, communities are switching from oil.
Gas, yeah.
Pretty dramatically. But recent research this year or last year, these fracking wells are, what is it called? Fugitive emissions. Their methane is being flared so much that it completely offsets, the thinking is, any gains from switching to natural gas. And I think a lot of people wanted to believe that, and now there's some pretty landmark studies earlier this year, I think, that will pretty much prove that.
Well, it's a good thing that the
Yeah.
administration
Great news. At the state level, governors in Washington and New York, obviously, they are taking that research into account. Hopefully, in places like Oklahoma, they will too. Anyway, on to part two, the analysis, and I'll trim. Yeah, it's 5 minutes. Okay. I'll trim this down dramatically. It's okay because it's like all charts and nobody wants to see it anyway. But for real, I was like, this is going to be boring. So a little bit of background. Our emissions accounting work started back in the 90s with ozone depletion, and that was when ICLEI came about. Was to with communities making commitments to tamp down refrigerants and other ozone depleting substances. That's progressed now in our day and age of greenhouse gases being a new threat. Development of these protocols and the ClearPath software showed in 2013. All of this is making so that we have more and more data available. So the number of inventories that communities have put into our ClearPath tool and worked with us on has just increased exponentially since the 90s, obviously as climate has become a bigger issue. But in the last 10 or 15 years especially. And not only that, now we finally, as of last week, got to this point where we have enough multiple inventories. So places like Red Hook developing their baseline in 2012 and then doing an update in 2015 and now another one in 2018 where we can start to put together those trend analysis charts for multiple cities. So this is showing the number of inventories and the number of cities that have that many inventories. So it's not the full list, but what is this showing? 88 cities have one community scale inventory. 58 have one government operations. Only a handful end up having like 10 or 11. So that creates a lot of noise in the data, as you saw when you were being the detective, that it's hard to figure out from afar what is going on. So we adopted this analysis analysis type called contribution analysis, used in social science and health sciences whenever they're trying to figure out causality and there's just like a really complex system. So we thought, hey, the cities are complex. Energy managers and urban planners don't have time to dig through the weeds of this data and figure out what's going on. Let's adopt this contribution analysis approach. I won't get into too much detail, but it allows us to normalize for things like weather, as weather changes year to year, or population change, or economic changes, and normalize for those things and be able to like peel away all the noise and see really what's going on, really what actions that a city is taking on, what kind of impact they're having. If they're doing an update to their energy code in the city, how much impact is that actually having on emissions? All those factors go into this contribution analysis work. And the output is a waterfall chart like this. This is a really simplified one, but this is what a city will get, where what's increasing emissions up the waterfall, what activities in the city are decreasing emissions. As an example, population growth is attributed to emissions change or emissions increases all the time. We found in this analysis that of looking at all these inventories, that's not always the case anymore these days. So that community that had the 11 inventories, I think they actually have 16 years of data, is Portland, Oregon, our champions in the ClearPath tool. Of course, it's Portland. And this is what their waterfall chart looks like. So they have many different things that are mostly decreasing emissions because they put a lot of time and money into their climate programs. I don't know why this got messed up, but this is the report that came out just last Tuesday at the Global Climate Action Summit that was held in San Francisco. The data is so new that I'm also glad I'm out of time, that I don't have to try to pretend that I really know what was going on there. But I do know that we used 15 pilot cities that each ran this contribution analysis, and then we pulled the data from 138 other inventories and Portland within 16 years. There's a pilot communities trying to get a broad span of who's in the states, different circumstances, that sort of thing. And then this chart you would see about a dozen times. So you're lucky that we don't have to go through it. But what we did is for all these different factors that go into the noise, into creating influence on emissions, things like the grid fuel mix and population and whatnot. We compared those with our 15 different cities and normalize it into a percentage base so that cities that are 50,000 can't be compared to cities that are 600,000 like Portland. And pulled out some key findings. So without going through all that, let's get, that pop quiz is going to be fun. Okay. You already saw what the answer is, but we're going to look at Portland a little bit, and this is their, now that you're detectives, so notice the spike here. Oh, this plays into what we were talking about earlier with Bellevue. So there's a spike in emissions out of nowhere when they were making so much progress in the years 2012 to 2015. What caused that spike? And if you saw the answer,
Drought.
Drought.
It was a drought, so they rely on hydroelectric power, and the drought year made it so they had to switch to natural gas and their emissions shot up a lot. So the drought subsided and their emissions are going back down to their trajectory. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the key findings this report is in the resources that Danielle gave you, so you can find it there, apply this contribution analysis to your own cities, work with us to do that, we'll be glad to. But the key findings are that a cleaner electricity grid and energy efficiency have important roles to play there. Yep. And then state policies also have a huge important role to play. So we looked at American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy, HCEE. They do a scorecard. Thank you, I'll wrap it up. A scorecard of energy efficiency for the top 51 cities, or the biggest 51 cities in the US. And then it showed that states that have strong energy efficiency codes and have updated their building codes, their commercial and residential energy sectors in the localities perform significantly better. So cities and counties working as an advocacy role to your state level government can have quite a big impact. The other one is population growth can be offset by like emissions changes offset by improvements in fuel economy to vehicle fleet and reduced vehicle miles traveled. So in the case of Portland, in Bellevue, in many of the cities we looked at, their population was growing steadily, but their emissions wasn't tracking side by side because of improvements in vehicle miles traveled. So people were not driving as much, probably to do with transit systems being put in place, some smart growth principles that, man, I just had so many examples I couldn't get to. So you can do this analysis yourself. Let's see if I didn't miss. Yeah, that's good. This toolkit we put together with DOE, Department of Energy. It's totally free. So that's the link. It's in the resources. If your community has at least 2 greenhouse gas inventories, you can start to do this sort of analysis yourself. Of course, we would love to have your communities as member cities to work with you on this with a little technical assistance support. You know, that's the main message of the action piece too, is you all have a lot of power. There's a lot of potential in the room, and with community groups like Cornell, like ICLEI, time is limited. Who heard of the Global Climate Action Summit last week? Okay, cool, great. My colleagues were there staying with their friends in San Francisco, and it was in San Francisco, and their friends had no idea that was going on. So this is encouraging. But the main message is, you know, time is of the essence. Like, we have a short amount of time to keep emissions in check, and it's people like you all on the ground, not people like me who just like get to go to fun events and like talk about data that they didn't have anything to do with. But it's people like you that actually control the influencing factors on the ground in your communities that can rein in emissions. You know, we'll love to help you do it and do the analysis that give you the tools to make solid data-driven decisions. Ones that have great names and are backed by data. But I hope that in some way this is a call to action. It's certainly exciting for me to be here with real life people and not in my room at home in front of a computer to see that kind of potential. So I'll just leave it there. I'll have some handouts and stuff, and you can get in touch with me. Thank you.
So I know that we probably have a long ways to go home, but maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions to stay
Okay.
out, and then maybe you can find the presenters real quick afterwards if you have any more questions. So 1 or 2 quick questions, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, so New York's luckier than many states in that a bunch of wind projects are coming online, solar programs, like solarized buying programs that many communities and many groups in Dutchess County promote. So all of those energy generators feed into the electricity grid, and that changes what's called the emissions factor. So when I say it's getting cleaner, I just mean when you turn on the lights, it's reducing, it's producing less emissions, CO2 than otherwise. Yeah. Yep.
Do you think the care path will be changed soon to reflect the research on the future emissions of flex gas?
Yeah, it will be. So that protocol I talked about is now from 2013, and it's undergoing the process of updating. I'm going to flip ahead to a slide because without being ICLEI members, you all still can contribute to some key things. So we're updating the protocol to include that new science. Also, the old protocols don't account for agriculture and forestry and land use. It was so city focused and the data wasn't good. So the update will account for this. You can take this survey in 1 minute and inform us about how forestry and land use should be included in these metrics, what's useful to you as a city. So that was like carrying off the topic, but yes, that data is going to be included and a lot more. This is where we have a gap because we need to talk to people. Any other questions? Yeah.
If I read one of the slides correctly,
Sure.
there's more progress being made in the cogeneration sector than in transportation.
Yep.
So, you know, to the extent that at a local level we can do things, it ought to be to reduce vehicle miles and encourage electric cars.
Yeah, here I can say yes confidently because your grid and your emissions factor is getting better. So if you switch vehicles en masse to the grid, there will probably be problems with making sure the grid can handle it, but it's getting cleaner all the time. And somewhere like Oklahoma, there are some studies that show if you switch to electric vehicles, you're not actually doing all that much good from an emissions standpoint. Of course, there's social benefits and whatnot.
The last time I was in Bellevue, I was struck by the number of Tesla cars you could see on the road.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
If I might add to that, Gail, I think there are some things that the municipalities can do to promote the efficiency of the building stock, because that emissions factor changes throughout the day. There's a lot of demand side reduction that can happen to reduce the demand so those less efficient peaker plants don't have to come online.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Colin. Thanks. Yep.
So, you know, on this inventory, trying to measure the greenhouse gas inventory and to try to get an accurate measurement. One of the things we bumped up against was the reluctance of like oil companies to disclose the usage based on the population. And I'm wondering if there is some, and the same thing even with the utility. I mean, Central Hudson is reluctant to give you data. I mean, we can talk about it by zone or, you know, zip code, and I'm not quite sure how forthcoming they are in terms of revealing that information. Have you figured out a way to get around this kind of, you know, to get disclosure of the data so that we can get a complete inventory on energy, sources of energy?
Yeah, it's tough in many places. The worst case scenario, you're using EPA estimates of per household butane usage, you know, and just extrapolating that out for your region. A better case is you are just explaining that you need aggregate data. They don't need to give you any, you know, cost estimates or number of households served, just like here's total for this whole community. And keep pounding them that way. We have way better luck on the local government operations side because you can say, hey, we need our own data. But yeah, it is tricky on the community side. In California, they are really progressive, the utilities there, and they make their data freely available to all communities as long as you're a city staff person and you register with the city staff email. I'd like to see New York go that way. I think it could be more likely if more communities are committing to issue these data requests. But there are tricks. It's just, I mentioned the problem of getting the local data. That's what you want. You don't want to have to say, here's what's happening in New York State, and I bet it applies to me this way, because maybe, I mean, it just isn't good for your long-range planning. That's where we're at with many communities, and that's why we only have 138 in this analysis, when we actually have like 400 cities with data in ClearPath, because it's just not reliable in those places. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but it's kind of like the sad state of where things lie right now.
Thank you very much.